closure of 35 TGI Fridays has led to more than 1,000 staff being made redundant. Administrators say a rescue deal saved almost 2,500 other jobs. And officials in Florida say the state could see its biggest evacuation in 7 years when Storm Milton hits. It's been upgraded to a Category 4 hurricane and has already seen winds of 150 miles an hour. In the city, the FTSE 100 closed up 22 points at 83.03. The pound buys $1.30 and €1.19. LBC weather, heavy rain spreading across the south and Northern Ireland tonight. Drier elsewhere in a low of 4 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Daryl Jackson.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening and welcome to Monday's Cross Question. It's 8 on LBC. On our panel tonight, to my left, Wendy Chamberlain, Liberal Democrat MP for North East Fife and their Chief Whip. She's got a herd 72 cats now, not 15 before?
It's 15.
That'll test you, won't it? We have next to her, making her debut on the programme, Kiki McDonough, businesswoman known for designing fine jewellery. To my right, Wendy Moulton, Conservative MP for Aldridge Brownhills, former Chief Whip herself. And next to her, Danny Shaw, the Home Affairs commentator, former advisor to Yvette Cooper. They are here to answer your questions. You can phone us on 0345 6060 973. You can text 84850 or say, Alexa, send a message to LBC, or is it send a comment to LBC? I think that's the one, isn't it? So please do that and we can get you on air as soon as possible.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Well, I'd love to ask you all about the breaking news that Jack Grealish has become a father for the first time, but I'm not going to because Danny in Harlow wants to know, what do you think the situation in the Middle East will be like on the 7th of October 2025? Wendy Moulton.
Well, I think all of us here would hope that there is stability and that there is peace. But who'd have thought a year ago we would be in the situation that we're in now? To me, it's really serious. I haven't got a crystal ball. I can only hope and pray that we can get to that point where negotiating continues, that there is a ceasefire. Nobody wants to see the continual killing and injuring of innocent civilians in all of this.
Do you think there's been just a dramatic failure in international diplomacy in this, because the United Nations seems to not have any role at all? The plaintive calls for ceasefires from Western countries fall on deaf ears in Israel and indeed on behalf of the terror organisations. Neither of them, or indeed Israel, believe in a two-state solution. So it's quite difficult to see where we go from here, isn't it?
I know, it really, really is. And you can apportion blame left, right and centre. Personally, I think the two-state solution is where it needs to get to, but it's dependent upon the parties that are involved. What worries me more, though, is that there are players sort of on the periphery who it feels are now starting to become involved, and I do worry about the region, absolutely. So it's incumbent upon all players to work together, but it's easy to say that. And then we will have the US elections coming up very, very soon. So what will the impact of that be as well?
OK, Danny Shaw.
Where are we going to be in 12 months? I think there are so many imponderables. The US elections that you've mentioned, Wendy, if Trump gets in, the situation may be very different to that we have now. I think, the response, Israel's response to Iran, and, what's that going to look like? It's impossible to say. It won't be resolved. We can be absolutely sure there will still be conflict in the Middle East.
A better question, sorry Danny, would have been 2030, because in 5 years' time you would hope that there was some new generation of politicians that may be coming through on both sides. Who knows?
Look, change can happen really quickly. It can happen within a couple of weeks if the dynamics are right, and so on. But
as Wendy well knows from her time in Liz Truss's administration.
But I think your question about the failure of diplomacy is a really good one, because I think Biden appears to have failed, really, to get Netanyahu to sort of really rein back properly. I mean, we don't know what would have happened if they hadn't had any conversations, but it feels as though the West has been saying to Israel for weeks and months, restrain yourselves, and yet Netanyahu's government hasn't done that.
Wendy Chamberlain.
Yeah, I think I would agree with Wendy from the perspective of, 7th of October last year when we were hearing about the devastating terrorist attacks. Nobody has thought that we would still be in a situation of conflict a year on. There was an assumption that off-ramps would be taken, but it does feel that there's been an escalation at every single point. So what I would obviously like to see, I think, is what everybody would want to see, certainly, a bilateral ceasefire in Gaza and also in the wider Middle East now. And we want to see the hostages released. But, I think the intervention of Iran last week is obviously a very concerning escalation point. And where the international community is clear is about wanting to see that de-escalation. But it certainly feels that from an Israeli perspective and also more widely, that doesn't seem to be where we're going. And I think there is the opportunity for that. It's very difficult to see if this continues to escalate. Where we go from there, and there are just so many factors that make predicting what the next 12 months might look like very, very challenging.
We also tend to concentrate on the Western response to put pressure on Israel. What nobody ever talks about is, Russia and China could put pressure on Iran, but they don't seem to be particularly willing to do that.
And that's part of a wider breakdown, given what we're seeing in Ukraine and elsewhere, that, actors that previously would have been at the table in some way are now no longer there because of other incursions. So, it does feel very, very difficult and difficult to see a way forward.
Kiki?
I think it's such a difficult question to answer. I mean, for me, it's an impossible question to answer. I'm not a Middle East expert. And for me, it's just unbearably sad to watch all these people being killed, whether it's Israel, Lebanon, Gaza, everywhere. I just think, mothers are losing their sons and daughters, husbands are losing their parents. I mean, it's just awful situation, it really is. And I can't see, because there's so much hate involved in all these sides, hating each other. I don't know, I think it's going to take a long time to sort out. So this time next year, I can't see there's a huge amount of progress, although it would be great if there was a ceasefire. And I wonder whether if the civilian population of all those countries get together and say enough.
I wonder whether I think one of the things that's not being talked about as much as it could be and needs to be is obviously the humanitarian situation. We've obviously got refugees from Syria who were in Lebanon now fleeing back to Syria, and it does make you wonder if wider actors within the Middle East start to be impacted on that, whether we will see some movement as a result of that.
I wonder also, Danny, maybe you can comment on this, whether you think that there's the sort of boredom factor among the public on this is starting to manifest itself, where it's leading the news every night. And I wonder whether some people are just, they don't want to, I mean, we've covered it on this show. I think every programme, bar one, since I returned from my enforced break on the 16th of September, every programme we've led with it or done a whole 3-hour programme on it. And sometimes you wonder, just how interested are people still? And then you have to make the editorial decision. Well, even if people aren't interested, we still have to cover it because it's so important.
I think there have been periods when it sort of dropped down the news agenda here, domestically anyway, particularly when we had the election. But, over recent weeks, we've seen, the conflict spilling over into Lebanon. We've seen that extraordinary sort of attack on the pagers and so on, which, I think most people would have sat up and noticed that. It was just, something out of James Bond. And, in recent days, obviously, there's been a lot of focus on the anniversary of October the 7th. So I think what we might see is a diminution of the interest over the coming weeks. But that's absolutely right. You can't keep it on the front pages and at the top of LBC shows all the time, because people do sort of tire of it, even though, it hasn't gone away.
Right, let's move on to something different. Actually, before we do, Paul has sent in a WhatsApp message saying, could Benjamin Netanyahu be seen as the greatest Israeli Prime Minister? Hezbollah and Hamas have been set back years, Iran has been shown to be toothless, and peace was never an option. I'll leave that one hanging. Right, you'll be grateful to hear Kiki. Scott in West Hampstead texts this. Some Tory MPs and sections of the right-wing press are saying that the Labour government is in chaos. Is this correct, or are we just seeing the teething problems of a new administration? Wendy Chamberlain.
I think this is interesting, given, you already referenced some of the chaos from the last Parliament, that it does sound a bit rich for Conservatives to be saying that the government is in chaos. But what is quite clear is we're nearly 100 days in and we're already seeing a reset. And when we think about the change that people voted for on the July the 4th, it doesn't feel like this is the change that they voted for. So clearly the government have made a decision. Clearly Keir Starmer has made a decision to change things. But I think to compare what we are seeing just now with what we saw in the last Parliament isn't correct. But it's quite clear they need to make those changes and they need to see some success from them quickly, because I think there has been too many muck-ups that they have been responsible for as opposed to the opponents, which is supposed to be our job.
Kiki.
Well, for me, it's not great for business to have chaos, constant chaos, which I agree with Wendy. There has been chaos when the Conservatives were in. I think, though, the Labour Party have been in power for 3 months and it's chaos. Labour MP has resigned, Sue Gray's gone. How? I don't know. And this constant doom and gloom. And here, there are thousands of people out there trying to run businesses and trying to attract new customers and so where's the hope, where's the come on everybody, let's do it, let's grow the country, let's do it. Instead we go, it's quite depressing, and it's it is hard for business, particularly if you're starting a business. My son's starting his own business right now, and you don't. It's quite grim starting a business when all around you is chaos.
Are you hearing of colleagues in the business community withholding investment, even though they've got the money to invest? They're withholding it until after the budget.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. I mean, and also we've had so much doom and gloom about the budget, and then we've had them saying, they might not do this, or they might do this, or they might not. I mean, we just want to get this wretched budget over and done with now, I think, so that everybody knows where they are. And I think absolutely businesses are holding fire. They're holding fire to employ people because of the new working practices that are coming in. They're holding fire to invest in other things because they don't know what's happening. I think it's a really difficult situation, and we need to get this budget over and done with. And then the Labour Party, Keir Starmer, who was never stopped talking about growth when he was during the election campaign, I'd like to see it.
Danny Shaw.
Chaos. Well, I mean, Liz Truss, those days, that was pretty chaotic. Boris Johnson, with ministers resigning virtually every hour, that was chaotic.
But we didn't expect
the Brexit shenanigans. Hang on. So the Brexit shenanigans, that was chaos. This isn't chaos. I honestly don't think this is chaos. This is some teething troubles. I think most people out there, most members of the public, I really honestly believe, don't know anything about Sue Gray, probably who she is, and probably don't care very much.
They do know about winter fuel allowance.
They know about the winter fuel,
and they know all the other things that go with it.
They know about Freebie Gate, and they know about the winter fuel allowance, and they were really bad missteps. And what they show is that there was a vacuum at the heart of government. There were key positions that were unfilled. There was no strategic communications director, and there was obviously tension between Sue Gray and others. I thought Labour did really well in the first couple of weeks. It was a very smooth transition. I thought they handled the riots exceptionally well, Keir Starmer, and then things started to go wrong, and they haven't been able to put it right. But it's not chaos. It will be fixed. And also, I would just say to people, calm down, give them a bit of a chance. They've been out of government for 14 years. It's not even 3 months yet, and I think they will get to be on the right track. It was inevitable that when you're making appointments, and people said this to me when I was working for Yvette Cooper in opposition, when you're making appointments initially, there's going to be some churn, there's going to be some comings and goings, there's going to be some people it's not right at the right position, or we need some people here, and so on. And that's proved to be the case.
But they have had a year to plan for growth.
Exactly.
They've had a whole year when they knew pretty much the polls were telling them they were going to get a big majority. That was the time to back up their words with a plan. And when
that was Sue Gray's job, to be fair, wasn't it? She came in to plan for at least the first 100 days of a Labour government.
And then how quickly it spiralled downwards. To me, I sense that there was clearly a manifesto, but there was no plan then to how to implement it. And we often talk in politics about the first 100 days, the honeymoon period. Well, my goodness, if this is a honeymoon period, what follows? There's so many year itch. I don't know.
But it does feel like they've tried to set the bar of expectations so low. But frankly, I think people don't have the tolerance that they had in 2010 about waiting for things to get better. They want it to get better quickly, and that's what they voted for. And I think the government have underestimated that strength of feeling.
Because there was that big sense of, we'll give you change, we'll give you hope. And then so very quickly we've seen, as you mentioned, Wendy, the winter fuel payment that has really hit people for six.
It was a real mistake.
And then... and that's not going to go away, because it's so late in the day to make a decision like that.
But there's an inherent contradiction at the heart of the winter fuel allowance, because on the one hand we were told it had to be done in order to save money. On the other hand, we're told that if everybody who can claim pension credit does so, actually the government will lose money. So you can't have both things.
No, you can't.
Well, Wendy, I don't want to sort of go back to painful memories, but you were Chief Whip for the 49 days of the Liz Truss government. And I mean, to be fair, she only had the 3 months of the leadership contest to prepare for what she wanted to do. But you've seen it from the inside, the sort of chaos that can ensue when things go wrong. What advice would you give to Labour in this situation, even if we don't use the word chaos, Danny?
Okay. Of course, I would use chaos and disarray, but one of the bits of advice that I was given when I became Chief Whip was from a former Chief Whip down in the House of Lords, and he said, Wendy, one of the hardest things to do is whip when you have a big majority, and that is so true. So that would be my best advice to the Labour Chief Whip,
Alan.
To Alan, and I know Alan very well, having stood against him in 2010 in Tynemouth. But because when you've got a big majority, there isn't that same sort of responsibility that there is when you've got a tiny majority. So I whipped during the Theresa May years when the Conservatives had barely any majority, but nobody ever wanted to let the side down. And so there was a different sort of self-discipline. So that's probably the best tip that I would give.
Okay, right. We'll move on to another subject shortly. It's 19 minutes past 8.
LBC.
As a
Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
8 on LBC. Let me reintroduce you to our panel. We have two, well, either current or former chief whips called Wendy with us. That doesn't happen very often. In fact, I think this is probably the first programme in the history of radio where we've had two Wendys on a panel together. Wendy Chamberlain, current Liberal Democrat chief whip, and Wendy Morton, former Conservative chief whip. Danny Shaw, Home Affairs commentator, and Kiki McDonough, businesswoman known for designing fine jewellery. Now, if you design fine jewellery, Kiki, you must have some very famous clients.
I wondered when that
In fact, I'm told that an LBC listener is one of your clients, Queen Camilla.
She is, yes, she is one of my clients, and I count myself to be incredibly lucky to have her as a client. I think she's incredible.
And so, do you meet her and she says, I'd like a new necklace or something?
I have met her.
I don't think we're going to get much more out of Kiki, are we, on this? Client discretion is always important, so I'm not going to push you. But I just want to see the level of guests that we get on this programme nowadays. Right, let's go to another text question from Kevin in Thanet. Will we shortly see the Falkland Islands and Gibraltar go the same way as the Chagos Islands, without any kind of consultation with the actual residents? Now, David Lammy has insisted, while speaking in the Commons this evening, that the status of the Falklands, Gibraltar and other British overseas territories are not up for negotiation. Wendy Morton.
Well, I sincerely hope not. And that I was in the chamber today and I really pressed David Lammy on this issue of the Chagosians, and had he actually spoken to them as part of the discussions and the negotiations. And I failed to get any answer whatsoever, which I thought was very, very disappointing. But I think in the Falkland Islands and the Gibraltar, they're overseas territories. They have the right to self-determination.
So exactly the same status as the Chagos Islands.
I would say they're all overseas territories, yes. But then there are other territories as well. Think about Cyprus. And I really worry that what we have here is potentially something that's the thin end of the wedge. And I think it's incumbent upon David Lammy and this government to actually, be really, really clean and clear in what their thinking is here, which is why I am pleased that, if there's going to be a bill and a treaty, it has to come to Parliament. It needs some proper parliamentary scrutiny. That's the most important thing here of all. This came completely out of the blue.
No, it didn't.
It did.
James Cleverly started it when he was Foreign Secretary.
No. What I'm meaning is that for this announcement to come when Parliament was in recess, and the reason that we were given was, well, it was because there were elections due in Mauritius. I mean, why the rush? Why the rush? Because
there are elections due in Mauritius, that's the rush.
Yeah, but I don't accept that that's good enough.
Whoever the president or Prime Minister of Mauritius is, they would want this out of the way beforehand.
And I just think it's as I said in the chamber today, I mean, Gordon Brown sold off the gold. Now we've got a Foreign Secretary who's handing over sovereignty, surrendering these territories.
But we've got a 99-year lease on Diego Garcia. That's very important. That's
hugely important.
That's the strategic importance of this. And this idea that, China will have a foothold on the Chagos Islands, well, I'm not quite sure how that matches up when we have a military base there.
That has to be the worrying thing here about the influence of China. I mean, these islands are strategically important, and 99 years is not that long, really, in the grand scheme of things.
OK, Danny Shaw.
I think there's a bit of party politics being played here.
Oh, say it ain't so.
I mean, the idea that this decision was made in recess, and you're going to have plenty of time to debate it. You've had a statement.
You would normally debate it though first, and it's normal protocol that it's the House that hears first, not the TV.
But Parliament's been in recess for so long that you can't delay some announcements. But I mean, coming down to the substantive, the question. No, I don't think this is going to mean that the Falklands or Gibraltar are suddenly going to be, the British are going to lose control of those. I mean, there were two rulings. Specifically about the Chagos Islands. The International Court of Justice 2019 said that the UK had an obligation to end its administration there, and then the UN International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea 2021 said that the UK was not entitled to sovereignty. Now, if we're going to abide by international law and international rulings, then that's a pretty good place to start. And, as Iain has pointed out, you've got control of Diego Garcia, the base there, the US, who are absolutely critical, are supporting this decision. I think in time this is just a sort of a little row that will go away.
I was reading over the weekend that all these reports that, the Americans did say that they supported the decision, but apparently behind the scenes, they've been a little bit aghast at it.
Well, they may be, but the public statements seem to be supportive, and the base is going to be there for 99 years. I think this is the right decision. I think this probably speaks a lot to Keir Starmer's willingness to adhere to international law, essentially. And I think that's why the decision's been made. And also, you're right to point out this was a process that was started, I think, by Cameron and Cleverly when they were at the Foreign Office.
There was some negotiations that were ongoing, but it was
they hadn't made the decision.
Exactly. And so there was a choice that this new government has made in a very, very short space of time. It's only a couple of weeks since Keir Starmer appointed some advisor, which is not.
But we're just having a discussion about how you're worried that the government's not making decisions and there's this vacuum. They've made a decision.
I haven't said that there was a vacuum and they're not making decisions. I've said that they're making some strange decisions with lack of accountability. I was being polite using the word strange.
Right, Kiki. Be honest, had you ever heard of the Chagos Islands before last week?
Not really. But we live in a dangerous world, and people, from what I've read, they are of strategic importance in defence. And I think that needed to be taken very, very seriously at this moment in time.
But do you understand that there may well be people on Gibraltar and the Falkland Islands who look at this and think, well, it could be us
I'm coming
next.
to that. I think it would be absolutely awful to give away the Falkland Islands. A lot of people... First of all, I think the Falkland Islands want to be British, and second, which we have to take in consideration. And secondly, a lot of people lost their lives keeping those islands British, and to give them away would seem to me deeply disrespectful of other people who fought for them. And Gibraltar, I think, is, again, quite a strategic island, if you like. It's not an island, but a rock, quite a strategic point for Europe.
And there, with Gibraltar, there's a Treaty of Utrecht, isn't there, in 1713, that I think probably makes it very different to the Chagos Islands. Wendy, I did an hour on this on Thursday, a phone-in, thinking that I'd get no calls at all, and the switchboard was just full right from the start. How wrong was I? But it's very interesting that given the way that Britain treated the Chagosians, in fact, sort of basically pushing them off the islands in the 1960s, they actually would rather be a British territory rather than belong to Mauritius. There seems to be no desire among the Chagosians for Mauritius to have sovereignty over their islands.
Iain and I actually asked some questions about what was happening in relation to the Chagos Islands in the last Parliament, and I'll be looking forward to seeing all these MPs asking future questions in future years about Chagosian welfare. I think the reality is there's two aspects here. I agree with Danny. We've just said at the start of this programme about how dangerous a situation the world is in and how uncertain it is. And so I think it's absolutely incumbent on the UK, therefore, to be not only following international law, but to be seen to be following international law. And I think the reality is, as you going back to the 60s, is we have done a disservice to Chagosians for a number of years. So I do think there is a bit of party politics to be expecting 3 months into a new government, the current government agreeing what was started by the Conservative government, that now we're going to criticise them in relation to Chagosians. The Chagosians are split between Seychelles, Mauritius and here in the UK. I think what I want to be focused on as we are moving forward in relation to this, yes, one is security, but two, the resettlement that is part of this agreement, and the support for that is absolutely clear, and that we ensure as parliamentarians we continue to ensure that that's delivered.
Text here from Mark, who says, for what it's worth, there is no mention or comment in the Argentinian press regarding renewed efforts to reclaim the Falklands / he says, Las Malvinas.
Yes, and I would also say that when I saw the announcement about this on the breaking news, the first other thing I saw was a statement from the Falklands Islands government making it quite clear that they saw themselves as part of the UK and that the UK government thought so too.
But I think the Vice President of Argentina, whose name I can't recall, I think she has made a big thing about this and saying, well, the Falklands will always be ours, etc., etc. This text continues, I spent 6 wonderful years in Buenos Aires, and most folk are just focused on putting a meal on the table, not sure who benefits from the sabre rattling. Well, can't answer that one, I'm afraid, but lots more questions to come. 0345 6060 973. It's 8:30 on LBC News Headlines with Daryl Jackson.
Israel's military says it intends to carry out new operations on Lebanon's southern coast. It's been carrying out intensified airstrikes aimed at Hezbollah's strongholds. Meanwhile, bereaved families have gathered in Tel Aviv 1 year on from Hamas's October the 7th attacks. 4 people have been taken to hospital after a school bus crashed in County Down. 43 people and the driver were on board when it overturned in Carrowdore earlier. A former Met police officer has been charged with 8 sexual offences against 2 women. 49-year-old David Carrick is due to appear in court later this month, charged with rape and indecent assault. LBC weather: heavy rain spreading across the south and northern Ireland tonight. Drier elsewhere and a low of 4 degrees.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC.
He was the most divisive Prime Minister in decades. But in my extended interview with Boris Johnson, is he now ready to apologise over Partygate?
Anybody who thinks that I was partying, having a knees-ups in number 10...
You don't know about the parties when I understand your own son's swing was broken. You're aware of that party?
Listen, I think
you are, because of the way you've changed.
No.
What rating out of 10 does he give Brexit?
I'd give it 10 out of 10 for what it enabled us to do during the pandemic.
And Boris Johnson sets his sights on the current administration.
If you take 70,000 in gifts from a guy, if you then give the guy a pass to number 10, that looks corrupt.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Back tomorrow morning from 7.
With Betfair, where odds move faster than polls. Play responsibly.
LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
8:34. Wendy Chamberlain from the Liberal Democrats, Wendy Morton from the Conservatives, Kiki McDonough for herself, and Danny Shaw for himself. They are our panel tonight. And we have a text question from Nicole in Worcestershire. Should there ever be a place for Boris Johnson back in the front line of UK politics? Now, in his upcoming memoir, which is published, I think, on Wednesday, he says he should never have apologised for Partygate and that the Conservatives were wrong to remove him as their leader. And you can hear this his extended interview with Nick Ferrari tomorrow morning from 7, only here on LBC. Kiki, let me come to you first. Should Boris Johnson be brought back? I mean, say the Conservatives, whoever the new Conservative leader is, fails and there's another one and then there's another one, there may well be a bit of a clamour for Boris Johnson to return.
Well, we live in a democracy, so if he stands for a seat and he's voted in, then we live in a democracy and we have to accept that he is going to be an MP. Where it goes from there is anyone's guess. I mean, I really don't know. I think it depends on how many people vote for him. It depends how many MPs vote for him. If there's a leadership contest, if there's who's a Conservative leader, and if they want him in the cabinet, that's if he gets to be an MP. I mean, there's so many sort of question marks about this that I think it's probably.
But what's your view? Would you like to see him back in politics?
I think you can't go back. I think you can't go back in so many things. I think in your career, whether it's being an MP or a cabinet minister or a writer, perhaps a writer, and you or anything, you can't go back. I think he'd find it very difficult to go back. Actually, I think everyone would find it just out of sync somehow.
Wendy Chamberlain, do you miss him?
Not particularly, not that I had very much by
smidge.
way of engagement. Well,
It was a hesitation there.
Yes, there was, wasn't there?
From a standards perspective, he made it very easy for us, and I suppose I'd point to my 71 new colleagues and think that Boris probably did have a part to play in that.
That's controversial, but...
Yeah, well, perhaps. But, I mean, what I would also say is that Parliament, the view of Parliament was that this was somebody who didn't deserve to be an MP and didn't even deserve to have a former MP's pass in order to be able to access Parliament as well. But look, here we are, the COVID inquiry, it's still ongoing. And, I have certainly not forgotten, even if Boris Johnson has, the very visceral anger of constituents who wrote to me who were prevented from attending the funerals of their loved ones as a result of the restrictions that Boris Johnson's government placed people under. And so I would ask Boris Johnson to reflect on that, but what he's clearly demonstrated is the reflection is not something that he does.
Wendy Morton.
I think that's deeply unfair, actually. I think he's the sort of person that does reflect. I mean, look, you never say never in politics. You never ever know. At the moment, though, I suppose the political answer, Ian, is that, we're focusing on a leadership election. We've got 4 candidates. We're in the business of choosing the next leader of our party to take us to the next general election. I mean, if I ask a lot of my constituents about Boris, though, they think highly of him. And we can talk about COVID, and we know there were things that, as government, we probably could have done better. We were all in a situation that we'd never been in before. But equally, I would always...
Like following the rules, Wendy.
No, hang on. Just remind people gently that Boris did push to get the vaccine. We were the first country that had the vaccine, which was a game changer for many, many people. I appreciate it.
For breaking COVID rules.
I appreciate there were others who, I'm not denying that, but I mean, it's not all. It's very easy just to portray him as one type of person. I think it's important to look at the bigger picture. When I was a minister, I didn't resign. I continued as a minister because I believe deep down in loyalty to my party. Some other colleagues felt differently.
It's on Liz Truss, you did resign and then unresigned.
Oh, that's another story.
I had to bring it up.
Devoted to that.
No.
But I think just going back to where we are as a party, we are focused on the future and choosing a new leader. But I am looking forward to reading Boris's book, and I bet you are as well.
738 pages.
I can manage that.
Be a good doorstop. I'm reading Graham Brady's book at the moment.
Oh, yeah, I haven't read that one yet, but that sounds
quite interesting.
I'm mentioned in that one as well.
Danny.
The question is, should there be a place in frontline politics for Boris Johnson? No, there shouldn't. It's as simple as that. I mean, Anthony Seldon, who writes biographies of prime ministers, described him, I think, as the worst prime minister we've ever had, even worse than Liz Truss.
So he won us, look at the majority who won us in 2019.
Brexit, the COVID, debacles of COVID, notwithstanding the vaccine, Chris Pincher, Partygate, Owen Paterson, the wallpaper, the prorogation.
You have a little list there.
I've got a little list in because I thought he was diabolical as Prime Minister. I'm sorry, but he was just completely unsuited to the role. He wasn't. He's not a serious person. Yes, he's a great orator and people warm to him. He's this kind of joker figure and he's sort of not in the traditional mould and all the rest of it. And he obviously writes really well. And he manages to sort of get himself out of scrapes and all the rest of it with a bit of bluster. But was a dreadful, absolutely dreadful Prime Minister and an appalling Foreign Secretary as well.
You go and ask a lot of people, and they don't
people
all
like him.
Some
people like him.
He's probably a bit Marmite. There are people who love him. There are people who
but he was dreadful. He was absolutely terrible for this country.
No,
I honestly
Do you think if you took COVID out of the equation, which obviously you can't, but let's pretend we can, do you think if that hadn't been there, because his argument in this book, as I understand it, is that he didn't really have enough time because Brexit dominated everything to begin with, and then COVID dominated everything, and therefore he didn't really have time to impose a levelling up agenda and all that. I mean, there has to be there is a bit of a point to that, isn't there?
Yeah, tell that to Asquith or to Chamberlain, as in Prime Ministers, leaders of this country, have to actually confront and deal with the situations that they are given at the time that they are leading.
Yeah, I didn't hear people complaining about the war.
And that's what we're looking at Starmer to do now, aren't we? And look where we've got so far.
Yeah.
We've got Sue Greygate, we've got Taylor Swift tickets, we've got spectacles, we've got clothes, and
they're not quite on the same scale, though, are they?
No, but they're all distractions.
Well, you're right on that, but I don't think you can really claim that the freebie stuff is anything
No, the
comparable
guy just had no morals, and he lied. He lied to Parliament, and he just was a habitual liar right through his whole career, including in politics. Just not suitable to be Prime Minister.
Right, let's move on. Martin in Doncaster is on the line. Hello, Martin.
Hello, Ian and panel. Yeah, my question is with first class stamps going up by 30p today to £1.65, why are we now getting a second class service?
So the price of a Royal Mail first-class stamp rose by 30p to £1.65 this morning. Second-class stamps did not increase in price from 85p each. Royal Mail is currently lobbying the communications regulator Ofcom, great organisation, I think, to let it reduce second-class deliveries to only Mondays, Wednesdays and Fridays. Kiki.
Well, I mean, so this is going to cost business quite a lot of money. These excess more expensive stamps and things not getting there. I mean, thank goodness we have emails, is all I can say, because you can send things, scan things in and get on it. I slightly despair of the post office. You look at the track record.
We should say it's Royal Mail, not the post office.
Oh, the Royal Mail. What can you say? I think it needs to get really, really efficient and but not be quite so expensive. I don't know how you do that, but I suspect that somebody's got to give that a try.
Well, I suppose you do it by increasing the number of letters that people send, but you're not going to do that by putting the price up by 22%, are you, Wendy?
No.
Wendy Chamberlain, I have to say.
One, you're not going to get it by putting the price up, but two, you're not going to get it by delivering a poor service. And I'm sure all of us here on this panel have got examples of family who have sent birthday cards or Christmas cards to people and they've appeared after a second-class stamp. And so I think that is part of the issue, that yes, we have to acknowledge that the business model has completely changed and been upended by the growth of emails. Reality is members of the public are using stamps to send cards and potentially some personal letters.
I gave up 2 years ago, and I would send probably, 150, 200 Christmas cards. I no longer do, and I spend part of the money on getting someone off the website Fiverr to design me a little graphic that I send to people on WhatsApp or email.
And you donate that money to charity as well. That's certainly something I do. But what we've also seen is the huge growth in parcels, and it does feel like the Royal Mail has lost out and has not properly.
And do you know why? Because in my local post office, I can only send parcels up to 2 kilograms each. If I want to send anything above that, I have to take it another sort of 3 miles into the centre of town. I'm not going to do that.
And then I'll also say in a rural constituency like mine, I've got a number of delivery and sorting offices and the staff in there are absolutely fantastic and they get frustrated about the fact that stuff doesn't get to them on time.
Wendy?
Yeah, I was out with local posties just recently and, and it was interesting just to see how the service has changed massively.
That's desperate. I have to get the local MP to help them with deliveries.
Well, I've had a bit of practice recently doing the general election, delivering my own leaflets. Yeah. So I normally go and visit the local post Royal Mail, get it right, at Christmas when the place is actually awash with parcels. So I went a bit earlier this year as well. But I think the price hike to £1.65 it's exorbitant, really. And there is a danger then it puts more people off. And so that impacts on the service as well. So clearly the question is the business model still fit for purpose for today's market? I think we all sort of have that love of the post office and Royal Mail. But there's lots of other different delivery companies as well. So I really hope they can find a way of working through this.
I send out a catalogue every year at Christmas, and we've just finished it, and it's going to be put in envelopes and posted out. And I spend my nightmares thinking, will it ever arrive? And it's a sort of automatic reaction when you're confronted with something that the Royal Mail is doing.
I still love getting birthday cards in the post.
But medical letters don't arrive on time, and that's really worrying.
And that's
medical letters should never be sent. They should be sent by email.
No, but then you've got a whole group of
but then some people haven't got email.
Who don't have email.
I've asked. I mean, I've had a lot to do with the NHS, mostly very positive over the last few years, but they continue to send me things by post. And I'm thinking, why? You've got my email address, you've got my mobile phone number, you don't need to do this.
There needs to be a proper choice, and if you elect for email, it should be email. But for people who don't have email, there still has to be post that is reliable. Otherwise, you get the vicious service.
Well, perhaps we should be helping people that don't have email or aren't confident using computers and email to help them get email and show them how to scan documents and so on, so we can kind of wean ourselves gently off letters. But it just feels that you need someone to go in there and just shake up this organisation, because, as you say, the business model is completely broken. They haven't really adapted to the new times. I mean, I think there was a time when if you sent a letter on a Tuesday, first class, you would know it would get there on the Wednesday. I think there was a period of time.
And do you know, in 1914, and I learnt this from Robert Harris's new novel, there were 12 deliveries a day in London.
Really?
Think about that. You could hear Asquith's lover.
Yes.
One of your lot.
He's my predecessor in East Fife.
Well, I hope you haven't followed in his stead. But he used to write a letter to his lover, Venetia Stanley, in the morning, and she would get it mid-afternoon.
Quick on email.
And the letter. Boom. Right, we're going to move on to a very serious subject in a moment. You can guess what it is. It's been in the news. 8:47.
This is LBC.
When it comes
Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Alexa, send a comment to LBC.
10 to 9 on LBC. Wendy Chamberlain, Wendy Morton, Kiki McDonough and Danny Shaw with us answering your questions. Now, this next question is a very serious one. So we're going to devote the whole of this quarter to it. Normally in the last quarter I like to have 2 or 3 questions, but you'll have a bit of time for this one. It's from Graham in Lancaster, who says, can assisted dying ever be introduced without it putting our most vulnerable citizens at too much risk? Wendy Chamberlain.
Which one?
So, I mean, this is obviously a very pertinent question given the decision by Kim Leadbeater, who was number 1 in the private members' bill ballot, to bring forward a bill in relation to assisted dying. I'm very conscious that as a Scottish MP, actually the legislation that would impact my constituents would be the legislation that's currently going through the Scottish Parliament, which is sponsored by my MSP colleague Liam MacArthur. And I think this question goes right to the heart of the whole debate, because I think...
So should you even vote on it, given that it won't affect your constituents?
I think that's an absolute question. And of course, how sitting Fridays work and what MPs are there to vote and stuff. But I can certainly assure you that I'm hearing a lot from my constituents in relation to this already. I came 19th in the PMB ballot this time, and that was one of the things that I discounted at a very early stage for that very reason. And I think, you know, my own view is that there's a bit of me that feels that instinctively that I would be supportive. But I would be very clear that unless I feel comfortable with the safeguards that any legislation would put in place, I certainly couldn't vote for it. And I think that will be the case for many MPs who are considering this. So I think it's easy to talk about the general principles. I remember a couple of years ago in the BBC, there was the programme Mayflies, which had Martin Compston, which was in some ways a more straightforward example of this debate, where it was a guy in his early 50s who had terminal cancer diagnosis, 6 months to live, completely, able to make the decision and made so. But those straightforward scenarios are very rarely not the case. These things are very complex and very, very difficult. So I'll be looking forward to seeing what Kim brings forward at Westminster, and I'm going to be engaging with my colleague Liam in Scotland, because without those safeguards, I think you just need to listen to people like Tanny Gray-Thompson who are talking about their concerns, and if those aren't assuaged, I think it's very difficult to see how a bill can progress, even if public perception, public opinion seems to be in favour of it. It's we as legislators that need to look at the detail.
Danny Shaw.
I think it can be. I think the question is, can we get a bill or can we get legislation in place that doesn't put vulnerable people at risk and so on. I think that can be done, and it has to be done, and that obviously is the biggest concern. I'm in favour of a measure that enables people to die with dignity with safeguards. My concern is really around who's going to make the judgment, the doctors or a judge, and the pressure that they would feel. And how are they going to do that? Is that going to be some sort of just a sign of form? Given all the pressures on medical profession at the moment, thinking about doctors having to make that decision, particularly perhaps if it's their first case where they're having to do it, or the first year when they're having to make those decisions, that's an enormous burden on them. And what you don't want, I suppose, is some of those cases to be turned into a sort of circus with legal challenges and perhaps different members of the family challenging it and so on. I think that would be really unfortunate if that happens. That's my main concern, but I think there has to be a way of getting this legislation through. It's just not right at the moment, the situation that we have, the awful situation that people find themselves in when, in the last few months of their lives. And so we have to, as a civilised society, we've made difficult decisions on other, tricky ethical issues. I'm sure we can do it with this.
Kiki?
Well, I agree with Danny. I think people should have the right to end their life, particularly if they're ill. Someone very close to me died of motor neurone disease. It was the worst thing I've ever seen in my life. And she was begging to be put out of this pain, which was just horrendous. And there was nothing we could do. And I think if you are going to pass the bill, you can have categories perhaps where you can say, end-stage cancer, motor neurone disease, end-stage. If there are some sickness, I think if someone just gets up one morning and says, I think I'd like to die, I think that's a different. But I think for people with end-stage illnesses, which are so horrendous, it is absolutely right for them to be able to say, please let me go.
Wendy Morton.
Well, it's a while since we've had this debate in Parliament. It must be, 5-6 years ago. I remember it was the first term that I was, when I was elected. And it's one of those really, really difficult subjects. I think we all know that. So I think it's probably right that we have this this debate now. I have some reservations about it coming on a Friday by the PMB, Private Members Bill route, who will be there. I think for me personally, I know that I've had a lot of emails in already, and I'm anticipating an awful lot more. And I would say to my constituents, I do genuinely read them. I have got some reservations, but I'm going to do what I think is right. Is I will go into it with an open mind, because I think every time we have this debate, medical technology, and there'll be medical advances. So I will absolutely listen. But I don't think any of us. No, I mean I've got some serious reservations on this, whether it's the right thing to do. I think the challenge is that often we can sit here and have this debate. We can think we have a view, but sometimes you find then you're in a situation where there's a close friend or a family who's very, very, very ill, and then maybe we, start and question some of our own thinking. But I do worry about, as you said, Danny, the impact on the medical profession as to when that decision has to be made or carried out.
But aren't they? I should be careful what I say here, but aren't they almost making that decision already with some people where they are helped along the way?
Well, I think it would be wrong for me to comment on what the medical profession may or may not do. I mean, of course, you can opt to not be resuscitated, but I think that's very, very different to putting in place, a law around assisted dying.
It's very different, isn't it?
And I think it's also about making sure that this is not about sort of saying that palliative care doesn't need to improve in the UK. It needs to improve everywhere, and people should have those reasonable expectations around end-of-life care.
Yeah.
A lot of the people voting for it, though, are probably average age of 45, 50, and the people who are dying of cancer and who are really, really ill quite often can be 75. And so I think that those people who are younger probably need to think about those people of 75, 70, 75, 80.
It would actually be interesting to understand what the age demographic of both the Commons and the Lords is on this, because I've got no idea.
I was going to say in the Lords, because there's a bill going to go through the Lords, isn't there, from Charlie Faulkner, Lord Faulkner. I mean, I don't know what the average age in the Lords is, but I suspect it's over 70, and in the Commons I think it's 51.
Yes, it'd be interesting to see what how the vote goes.
I think public opinion has moved on this. I suppose where my thinking is as legislators either voting or not voting for this, we need to ensure that the safeguards from Graham's question are absolutely in place.
But that's the role for the parliamentary draftspeople, isn't it? Notice I didn't say draftsmen there, Wendy. And I mean, surely we have experts who are expert enough to draft the legislation that would assuage your
and we've got
concerns.
other countries that we can look at and we can learn from as well. We're not the first in this.
And they will do the drafting, but then it's incumbent upon us as members of Parliament to give it the closest scrutiny that it rightly deserves.
All I can say is whenever I do a phone-in on this now, it's almost one-way traffic in terms of phone calls saying that people think the law should be reformed. Now, that may change over the next couple of weeks, because I'm sure we'll come to it again. Right, a fun question from Hayley in Shrewsbury. A list of the rarest new coins has been revealed, with one showing an Atlantic salmon fish on one side and the king on the other topping the list. What else deserves to be depicted on our coins? Danny Shaw.
Well, when England's men's football team finally win a trophy, a proper trophy again, I think that should be on the coin.
Okay, Wendy Chamberlain.
I think we need some comedy catchphrases. That would be a bit of fun. See if you can collect
Like
them.
what?
I don't know, like Only Fools and Horses, or a favourite of mine, Chewing the Fat in Scotland. If you haven't seen it, you should definitely catch it.
Okay. That wasn't what I was expecting. Kiki?
Well, aside from a pair of my earrings, of course, I think I'd probably put my favourite building in the world, which is Big Ben. I love Big Ben. And never stop. I've born and brought up in London. I've never lived anywhere else, and every time I pass it, I look at it.
It is sort of... I mean, you're there every day. Does that sense of wonderment ever
No, it
disappear?
doesn't. And my office has got a view just towards the Elizabeth Tower, and it's stunning when the sun's shining on it since it's been restored.
Might have to
all
come and visit you.
Please do. Yeah.
So what would you like to see on the
Well, I think given you've got 2 Wendy's on the programme and it's a first, we should have Peter Pan or Tinkerbell. You're lost for words now, aren't you?
Almost. Apart from, I'm sure there are many people who would like to know where they can view or possibly even buy your jewellery. Do you have a website that they can visit, Kiki?
I do. It's www.kiki.co.uk.
Just a 4-letter domain name?
4-letter domain.
Wow, you were ahead of
I got
time.
that very early on.
You must have done.
I was on it.
Well, there you are. Let's hope you get a few orders as a result of that. Now, on tomorrow's panel, we have the Leader of the House of Commons, Lucy Powell, former Tory Universities Minister David Willetts, the Spectator's political journalist Cindy Yu, and the Guardian columnist and political sketch writer John Crace. He's got a new book out, which is all about dogs and politics. Sort of, I think, anyway. We'll find out more tomorrow. Right, coming up in the next hour, we are going to be joined by the 4th Tory leadership contender. We've done Tom Tugendhat, we've done Kemi Badenoch, we've done James Cleverly. Tonight, it is the turn of Robert Jenrick. I'm going to be talking to him for about 20 minutes, and then it's your turn to ask whatever question you like of the man who is leading the field in the Tory leadership contest. Of course, tomorrow, it's the 3rd ballot. One of the 4 is going to be knocked out. Who's it going to be, Wendy Morton?
I'm not.
Who are you supporting?
I'm not declared.
Oh, God. Honestly, what are you like? It's the talk up to the beginning of the hour. You want a headline. Anyway, if you'd like to speak to Robert Jenrick, the number to call 0345 6060 973.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, the Prime Minister says there's a real danger of a regional